When people talk about modern horror games, The Evil Within often comes up as one of the most intense and unsettling experiences you can play. Developed by Tango Gameworks and directed by Shinji Mikami, the creator of Resident Evil, the game tries to bring back the feeling of classic survival horror, while also adding its own unique psychological style. It's not just a game about fighting monsters, it's about tension, confusion, fear of the unknown, and trying to survive in a world that constantly feels like it's falling apart. What makes The Evil Within so memorable isn't just the enemies or the combat, it's the atmosphere, the strange environments, the unsettling story, and the constant feeling that something is deeply wrong with the world around you. Even without major spoilers, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to how the game builds its horror and keeps players on edge. The story of The Evil Within begins with the detective Sebastian, who arrives at a crime scene with his partners Joseph Oda and Julie Kidman. Very quickly, things go horribly wrong. The situation spirals into something that clearly goes beyond a normal investigation. Without revealing too much, the story throws the player into a world where reality itself feels unstable. One moment you might be exploring an abandoned village, and the next moment the environment shifts into something completely different. Hallways twist, building collapse into new shapes, and location change without warning. It creates a strong feeling that the player is trapped inside something that doesn't follow normal rules. The tone of the game is extremely dark and oppressive. Everything feels grimy, worn down, and hopeless. The environments look like places that have been abandoned for years, filled with rust, blood, and decay. Even when the player finds temporary safety, the game rarely lets them relax for long. Personally, The Evil Within is one of those games that completely pulled me in. It's the kind of game that I constantly find myself thinking about even when I'm not playing it. Sometimes I'll finish the session and immediately want to jump right back in again, because the world is just that interesting and unsettling. There's something about the atmosphere and the theme that feels different from most other horror games. A lot of games try to be scary with loud moments or jump scares, but The Evil Within feels deeper than that. The setting feels heavy and mysterious, like you're slowly uncovering something you're not supposed to understand. I genuinely get excited to play it. It's the kind of game where you sit down, turn the lights off, and just get completely absorbed into the world. Even when things get intense or stressful, I still find myself wanting to keep going, just to see what strange environment or disturbing situation comes next. And one of the biggest strengths of The Evil Within is its atmosphere. The game constantly makes the player feel uncomfortable in subtle ways. Lighting is often dim, with shadows covering large parts of the environment. You rarely have a clear view of what might be hiding in darkness. Many locations are inspired by classic horror settings: abandoned hospitals, crumbling villages, dark forests, industrial buildings filled with machinery, distorted dreamlike spaces. But the game doesn't just copy these settings, it constantly changes them in strange ways. Sometimes rooms rotate, hallways stretch longer than they should, or entire buildings rearrange themselves. It gives the impression that the world is unstable and unpredictable. The visual style leans heavily into psychological horror rather than just jump scares. The environment themselves often tell a story through small details: broken furniture, blood stains, strange symbols, or objects placed in unsettling ways. The environmental details help make the world feel disturbing, even when nothing is actively attacking the player. There's a certain style to The Evil Within that feels unique compared to other horror games. The environments don't just feel scary, they feel symbolic and surreal, almost like you're walking through someone's nightmare. The mixture of grimy realism and strange dreamlike moments make the whole experience feel unpredictable. You never really know what kind of place you're about to walk into next. Sometimes the game feels like a traditional horror story with creepy villages or dark hallways. Other times it feels like something much stranger, where reality bends and the environment itself becomes part of the horror. That unpredictability is a huge part of why I enjoy the game so much. Another major element of the game is its enemy design. The enemies in The Evil Within are disturbing and unpredictable. Many of them look like twisted versions of humans, with unnatural movements and horrifying appearances. Instead of just being generic monsters, each enemy feels intentionally designed to make the player uneasy. Some move slowly, but relentlessly. Others appear suddenly and force the player to react quickly. The way enemies behave also adds to the tension. Sometimes they patrol areas like they're searching for you. Other times they hide or appear from unexpected places. This makes exploring each area feel dangerous. The game also includes some particular memorable creatures that act more like an unstoppable threats rather than normal enemies. Encounters with these characters often focus more on survival and escape than direct combat, which increases the feeling of fear. While the Evil Within does include combat, it never lets the player feel completely powerful. Resources like ammunition and healing items are often limited, which forces players to think carefully about how they approach each situation. Players can use several different weapons, including firearms and other tools, but the game encourages strategic thinking. Sometimes sneaking past enemies or using the environment is a better option than fighting everything. Stealth plays a big role in survival. If players move carefully, they can sometimes avoid enemies or eliminate them quietly. But mistakes can quickly lead to dangerous situations where multiple enemies attack at once. The game also introduces a system where certain enemies must be burned after they are defeated to prevent them from getting back up. This mechanic adds another layer of strategy because players have to manage their limited matches. All these mechanics reinforce the survival horror feeling. Every decision matters, and wasting resources can make later sections more difficult. And as much as I love the game, there's one thing that constantly frustrates me: the camera. The camera sometimes feels way too close to the character, which is most of the fucking time, which can make it harder to see what's going on around you. In a game where awareness and positioning are really important, that close camera can make certain moments feel more awkward than they should. The biggest issue for me is when you aim your weapon. When you go to aim, the camera suddenly zooms in a lot more than expected. Instead of feeling smooth or natural, it can feel like the view suddenly snaps in too tight. During tense encounters, that extra zoom can make it harder to keep track of enemies around you. Sometimes it almost feels like you're fighting the camera as much as the enemies. To me, this is honestly the game's biggest flaw. It doesn't ruin the experience completely, but it's definitely something I notice every time I play. What really separates The Evil Within from many other horror games is its psychological horror. Instead of relying on monsters or gore, the game constantly plays with the player's perception of reality. Sometimes the world changes suddenly without explanation. Entire areas shift while the player is standing still. Doors lead to unexpected places. Objects appear where they shouldn't be. These moments create a sense that a player is trapped inside a nightmare rather than a normal world. The game also uses sound design extremely well. Strange noises echo through empty rooms. Distant screams or mechanical sounds make it hard to know what might be nearby. Silence is often used just as effectively as loud moments. Music is used sparingly, which makes the quiet moments feel even more tense. The story of The Evil Within is intentionally mysterious. Instead of explaining everything directly, the game slowly reveals pieces of information through exploration. Players can find documents, recordings, and environmental clues that hint at what is really happening. These details help build the lore of the world and give insight into characters and events behind the scenes. The narrative can feel confusing at times, but that confusion is part of the experience. The player is meant to feel lost and uncertain, just like the main character. As the game progresses, more pieces of the puzzle start to come together, but it never loses that strange, dreamlike quality. Visually, The Evil Within has a very gritty and cinematic style. The game uses heavy shadows, film grain, and dramatic lighting to create a dark and unsettling mood, even though I turned off the film grain, because I just don't like that on my games. Certain visual effects make the world feel unstable. Environments distort, objects shift suddenly, and the player sometimes experiences strange visual transition that makes it unclear what is real. Classic games like Resident Evil 4 clearly influenced its gameplay style. The focus on careful resource management, tense combat encounters, and disturbing enemies feel very similar. However, The Evil Within leans much more heavily into surreal horror and mind-bending environments. It feels like a mix of classic survival horror and psychological thriller. This combination helped the game stand out when it released. Even with the camera issues, the overall experience of The Evil Within honestly blew my mind. There aren't many games that manage to create such a powerful atmosphere while also keeping gameplay tense and engaging. Every time I play it, I end up getting pulled deeper into the world. The strange environments, disturbing enemy designs, and psychological storytelling make the whole experience feel unforgettable. It's the kind of game where you finish a section and immediately start thinking about what might come next. That constant curiosity is part of what makes it so addictive to play. Despite its flaws, the creativity and ambition behind the game are incredible. When The Evil Within first released, reactions were somewhat mixed. Some players loved its return to difficult survival horror gameplay, while others found certain mechanics frustrating. Over time, however, the game developed a strong fan base. Many people appreciate its commitment to horror and its willingness to embrace strange, unsettling storytelling. The Evil Within is not a typical horror game. It doesn't try to make players feel like action heroes. Instead, it focuses on making them feel lost, vulnerable, and constantly unsure of what might happen next. Its combination of disturbing environments, strategic survival gameplay, and psychological storytelling creates an experience that sticks with the players long after they finish it. For me personally, it's a game I keep wanting to go back to, even with the camera problems. The world, the theme, and atmosphere are so strong that I can't help but keep playing it. For fans of horror games, especially those who enjoy darker and more unsettling experiences, The Evil Within remains one of the most memorable titles of its generation. It's a game that embraces fear in many different forms, not just monsters, but confusion, isolation, and the feeling that reality itself might not be trustworthy. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful.